Hi everyone, David Aragona and Craig Milkowski here with the TimeformUS preview of the Grade 1 Kentucky Derby on Saturday at Churchill Downs. The Run for the Roses is race 12 on a 14 race card at Churchill, going a mile and a quarter for the 3-year-olds. And Craig, as is the case just about every year with the Derby, 20 horses in the main body of the race, a lot to sink your teeth into from a handicapping standpoint. This year we do have a couple of runners on the also eligible list, both likely to be big prices in this race, but they will only draw in if there are a couple of defections in this Kentucky Derby field. And as you can see from the morning line in this race, Craig, it is expected that two horses are going to separate themselves from the pack in terms of the wagering for this race. Those, of course, are the number 17 Fierceness, who is the likely favorite, and the number 2 Sierra Leone, who I think most people do expect to be a clear-cut second choice in this Kentucky Derby. But if you get past those two, you're going to get a nice price on just about everybody else.
Yes, quite the interesting morning line. You don't often see this kind of gap between the top two and everyone else. Obviously, a lot of that's because of the field size, but I do think there are some real questions about both of those two, not ability wise, but in some of the things we see on the track and how they run their races.
Yeah, we'll see how short they ultimately do go off. I think it's tough for a couple of horses to go off at 3-1 or less in a 20 horse field like the Kentucky Derby. I've got them a little higher personally on my line for this race, but they are likely to be the two horses that do attract the most support in the wagering. And let's take a look at where they might be placed on the TimeformUS pace projector for this Kentucky Derby. And I think pace is one of the most important things to discuss with this race, Craig, because I've seen a whole variety of takes on how this is going to play out. The Kentucky Derby is a race that does just naturally lend itself to very fast early fractions. That stampede of 20 horses heading down a quarter-mile straightaway to a turn, I think jockeys just naturally leave for position, so that maybe creates a faster pace than some of the running styles would indicate. So we generally do see fast paces in the Kentucky Derby, but I think one of the most debated things is who is ultimately going to wind up on the front end, and maybe the actual post position draw did dictate that a little bit, because the number 17 Fierceness drawn outside, and I think that gives John Velasquez and Todd Pletcher some options about where to place him in the early stages. I do agree with this pace projected that the horses most likely to be vying for the front end are those such as Dornoch, Just the Touch, and Track Phantom. How are you viewing it?
Yeah, I view it the same way. Maybe I wouldn't have Just a Touch. I know we got some feedback on social media, like nobody seems to think he's going to lead, but I don't think it's out of the question. I mean, he's a horse that tried 2 turns last time and went blazing fast, chasing Top Connor, the Chad Brown horse, who I don't know if he was really supposed to be a rabbit, but he certainly ran that way, and he was right there. Dornoch drawing inside. It seems like he's got no choice but to go. And Trek Phantom just gets out of the gate so well, has high early speed. I could see all three of these being right there. And as you noted, Fierceness is fast as well. And he has options from the outside, but it's not like he's going to be 6 lengths behind them either. He should be right up on the pace.
And it should be said, for those that are unfamiliar with the TimeformUS pace projector, this is not Craig and I moving the chiclets around based on our opinions. This is a representation of how fast the horses have actually run in their prior races. It's based on their pace figures in those prior starts. So as Craig said, Just the Touch coming out of the fastest pace prep race. That's why he's shown with that slight early lead over Track Phantom and Dornoch. Well, Craig, speaking of Dornoch, let's begin with him as we go through this field in post-position order. And he is one of the potential pace players in this race, likely going to be a pretty big price, which maybe is somewhat of a surprise given the way he ended his 2-year-old season, looking like one of the top potential players for this Kentucky Derby at the start of the Derby Trail season. But he scored a workman-like victory in the Fountain of Youth, didn't necessarily knock anybody's socks off that day, and that was just a little disappointing at a short price in the Bluegrass last time. They tried to rate him off the fast pace that day. Danny Gargan has been pretty explicit that they want to send this horse to the lead this time, getting back to those front-running tactics that have worked in the past, but not always the easiest to make the lead from the rail post position in the Kentucky Derby.
No, for sure it isn't. I imagine they're going to try. And I wonder about that last races too. Yes, they rated them, and I'm using air quotes, but that race was blazing fast early. And I'm not sure gunning him up there to get in the battle with Top Connor was going to do him any favors either. This horse just seems up against it to me, particularly with the draw to the inside. Hasn't really looked like the same horse we saw as a 2-year-old this year.
Well, as we're discussing the bluegrass, let's take a look at the replay of the stretch run and focus on the winner of that race, the number 2, Sierra Leone, who was coming from far off the pace to get the job done. That is his running style. He is a deep, deep closer who is likely to try to come from towards the back of the pack in this Kentucky Derby, as he has in all of his prior starts, Craig. And this horse just continues to put in this consistent late rally. I think he's one that you can certainly rely on in the Kentucky Derby. He's just a nose shy of being undefeated in his 4 prior career starts, overcame a slower pace to win the Risen Star 2 back. You see some of those blue color coded pace figures in his TimeformUS running line. Did get pace to close into in the bluegrass last time, but he was the only horse that made that big run from the back of the pack.
Yeah, he's clearly a very good and talented horse. He's been improving his speed figures, particularly last time in the bluegrass. Ran his best number yet. He should get plenty of pace in here. The one concern I think you have to have is that he's probably going to be really far back. He wasn't even shown on the pace projector. I know he added blinkers and showed a little bit more speed last time, but this is a 20 horse field. He draws inside. I imagine he's going to get glued to the rail, saving ground, and he's going to have some things go his way to get that long sustained run.
Yeah, it's not always easy to work out that trip from so far back. And from a speed figure standpoint, it's not like he has that big of a buffer because he's not so much faster from speed figures based on compared to some of the other main contenders in this race. The number 3 is Mystic Dan, and he scored his most impressive victory 2 back in the Southwest, which we'll take a look at here. That is him just scooting up the inside over this muddy track at Oaklawn Park that he clearly relished. In retrospect, Craig, I think that the rail trip that he got was very beneficial to him because racing inside on February 3rd at Oaklawn Park did seem to be an advantage, but he clearly put forth a big effort this day, finishing 8 lengths ahead of Just Steel, who will match up against in here once again. Just Steel, though, turned the tables on him last time out in the Arkansas Derby, where Mystic Dan was unable to produce that same late finishing kick. Now he's stretching out to the 1.25 miles, and I would imagine his connections are not that upset to get it inside post position.
No, I would think not. He's a bit of an enigma for me. As you say, he didn't do a lot of running last time, even though he got 3rd in that Arkansas Derby. Had some things go his way in the Southwest, riding on the good rail, the muddy track. I think the truth is probably somewhere in the middle with this horse. I'm not sure he was fully cranked. He was basically assured to be in the Kentucky Derby after his win in the Southwest, but he's one I'm a little torn, but I could see him just saving ground mid-pack and getting a good trip and coming running late.
The number 4 is Catching Freedom, and he ran pretty well in one of the key prep races for this Kentucky Derby, that being the Risen Star 2 back. The top 5 across the wire in the Risen Star are all in the main body of this Kentucky Derby field, and he was 3rd that day, sort of swapping lead to the stretch, and he's a horse who had been pretty immature through the early part of his career, lugging in some races, being unprofessional with his lead changes, so I think it was a really good sign that he was able to switch leads on cue and finish as powerfully as he did when he got the victory in that final round prep race, the Louisiana Derby last time. Going 1 mile and 3/16 doesn't feel like a horse that has too many stamina questions to answer at this point, Craig. He's got a similar kind of running style to Sierra Leone. Arguably, that one is run a little faster, shown a little bit more, but Catching Freedom definitely not far off being one of the top contenders in this Derby.
No, I think that Risen Star is worth watching. It just said Catching Freedom wasn't very professional that day. And I think there's an argument to be made that if he was more professional, he'd have been right there with Sierra Leone. Was able to get things straightened out in the Louisiana Derby, took another step forward. And I think he's a major player in this race.
He's also a horse that has really stepped forward in his training since earlier in the year. He was sort of a horse that was pretty uninspiring in his morning drills. He's definitely been doing better leading into this Kentucky Derby. The number 5 is Catalytic, and he earned his way here through a 2nd place finish in the Florida Derby, but it was a distant second behind that runaway winner, Fierceness. He did get a nice speed figure for that effort. 1:11 TimeformUS speed figure is faster than some other big prices that are going to be in a similar range to Catalytic, but it's just the 4th start of his career, Craig. Only the 2nd 2-turn attempt that he's ever encountered. So a lot of obstacles working against this horse.
Yes, there are. The speed figure, I wonder about that. Not saying it's not accurate. I think it is accurate, but sometimes those figures, when you chase a runaway winner home, tend to be a little bit inflated. I look at this one as maybe one that would try to be more a pace factor. Don't really see him sticking around at the finish.
The number 6 is Just Steel. He achieved the highest placing of any horse in this Kentucky Derby field from the Arkansas Derby last time, finishing ahead of Mystic Dan, who we just talked about. Obviously couldn't catch Muth on this day, he not being eligible for the Kentucky Derby as a Bob Baffert trainee. But Just Steel, Craig, got a 118 TimeformUS speed figure for this effort. And when we show his TimeformUS past performances after this, you might say, well, where'd that number come from? Because it's so much faster than anything he's earned before. But you can make some real excuses for Just Steel's effort 2 back and 3 back in the Rebel and the Southwest.
Right. I remember you talking about that as we previewed the Arkansas Derby, and he was able to run a very nice race that day. Big speed figure. And if you're one who values experience in a race like the Kentucky Derby, he is very experienced. He's shown up. He ran all 4 of the Kentucky Derby points races at Oaklawn Park, has double-digit starts. So definitely an edge on most of the field in that regard.
And he certainly has a trainer in a corner that knows how to win the Kentucky Derby, that being the veteran D. Wayne Lucas. The number 7 is Honor Marie. He finished just a length behind Louisiana Derby winner Catching Freedom, who we already talked about, and he ran pretty well that day, Craig. It was definitely a big step in the right direction from his seasonal debut in the Risen Star, where I think the pace really worked against him. He just got even further back than Sierra Leone in the early stages and never was in a position to be able to make up that ground. He put in a much more effective late run last time in the Louisiana Derby, effectively stretching out to the mile and 3/16. Doesn't seem like distance is supposed to be a question for this horse, who's got plenty of stamina on the bottom side of his pedigree. And he's attracted a lot of buzz this week about how well he's been training coming into the Kentucky Derby.
No, I have no knocks on this horse other than similar to Sierra Leone. He's a horse who just is probably going to drop off the screen, have to navigate a trip from the back. Should be in the mid pack, so maybe not pinned on the rail like that one. But I would want to price to bet a horse like this, but you are probably going to get it as he's 20-1 on the morning line.
Yeah, and that's the only thing I'm concerned about, Craig, with how well he's been training and the buzz around him. I've got him at 12-1 on my line. I'm not sure he's going to be that 20-1. We'll see how that all shakes out and how they bet this Kentucky Derby. The number 8 is Just a Touch, and he was the horse that was contesting that fast pace in the Bluegrass that ultimately stepped things up for Sierra Leone to run them all down. But Just the Touch, Craig, he's really done nothing wrong in his 3 starts. He came right out of the gate on debut with an impressive performance going 6 furlongs, stepped up in distance to finish a good second in the Gotham, and then last time stretched out to the mile and 1/8, like at a distance, not a problem for him. And I think he did show some real stamina to hold second after contesting those fast fractions, all color-coded in red in TimeformUS. It's just a question of whether or not this is going to be too much of an ask in just the 4th start of his career.
Yeah, a few years ago, I would have been more concerned about that, but we just saw Mage do it last year in 2023, winning in his 4th career start, and kind of a similar profile where he broke his maiden first out, wasn't able to get the job done in a couple stakes, but run very well. I'm not sure I'm ready to make that leap yet that this is the way to go, but he certainly fits on speed figures. He should be up close and at the very worst have a clean trip.
Yeah, that 120 TimeformUS speed figure makes him the 2nd fastest horse in the race, if you believe he can repeat it. The number 9, Encino, is another Brad Cox trainee drawn right alongside of his stablemate. We'll take a look at his last victory in the Lexington, which did qualify him for this Kentucky Derby. He's won 3 in a row, Craig, but this was his first ever victory on the dirt, trying the surface for the first time in this Lexington, and he's fending off a good horse in the Wine Steward in the late stages of this race. That said, I think the way this track was playing at Keeneland on April 13th definitely favored horses that were not only forward, but also racing on the rail. And he got a rail trip every step of the way. So I wonder if that speed figure is really going to hold up, especially now that he's stepping up into a much tougher spot as such a lightly raced horse.
I've seen a lot of buzz about this horse. I don't really get it. I know he looks good on the track. I don't know how he's going to work out a trip. He's been a horse who has shown speed in 2 of his 3 wins, seems to be his preferred running style. He showed a little versatility 2 back, but I just, like you, I have real questions about the Lexington, and I don't know that he was really pointed to this race. It just seems like one, he kind of backed into the field, and that's never the kind of horse I'm looking for.
Yeah, he definitely has impressed at his morning training, but like you, I'm a little skeptical that he's fast enough to get forward in this race. And I've got the same questions about the number 10, Tio Password, who was one of two Japanese runners coming in for this race. He qualified through the Japan Road to the Kentucky Derby, earning this berth in the Fukuryu Stakes last time. And he is a horse who has won both career starts, but being just a 2 for 2 runner, he is the least experienced member of this field, Craig. And he's one who has been forwardly placed in both of his Japanese starts, actually led from gate to wire in that stakes race last time, but it appeared that it wasn't a particularly taxing pace, and I wonder if he's going to be fast enough to get forward against some very quick American-trained 3-year-olds.
I wonder that as well. I know we had some questions about why we don't have the Japanese horses on the pace projector this year. We've put them on in the past when they ran in Dubai. We're not going to do that this year because, for one, the horse coming from Dubai we'll get to later really isn't a front runner. Tio Password is one. It's no way to compare them. We don't get enough horses shipping over from Japan to the States for the dirt to really make accurate pace figures. I would imagine he's going to try to get forward, but it's going to be a tough ask because there's some real speed in this contest.
Tio Pass were definitely a wild card with regard to the pace situation. The number 11, Forever Young, could be a bit of a wild card with regard to the result of this race, Craig, because he is undefeated as well, coming in 5 for 5 off this victory in the UAE Derby last time. And like what you saw this day, handling the mile and 3/16 distance without issue. This race did not feature a taxing pace like he's probably going to encounter in the Kentucky Derby, but he really came home fast this day, Craig. I think the final quarter mile went in about 24-1. And he was able to pull away from this field to win by 2 lengths. He won going a distance that maybe is a little short for him too back in that Saudi Derby, a 1-turn mile race where he ran down a quality American runner in Bookham Dano to get the job done, keeping his undefeated record intact. I know there's some concern about him handling kickback, and we'll see how all of that transpires because he is drawn right smack dab in the center of this field post 11, but this horse might be pretty talented.
I think he's very talented. Like you said, when he won in Saudi to run down Bookham Dano, who looked home free, that was really impressive to me. I think he's a bit of a wild card in here. I don't think I put him in my top 4, but I think I wouldn't be shocked if he won this race. I do wonder what you have him at on the morning line. I could see a scenario where he's the 3rd choice in here, which is probably why I avoided him, but I won't be shocked if this horse wins. Eventually, a horse is going to win the Kentucky Derby from Japan. They're just, the program there is too good and too much quality not to have it happen eventually.
Yeah, I've got him as the 9-1 co-3rd choice with Catching Freedom. We'll see how that all plays out. I think some handicappers have been burned by these UAE Derby winners in the past, so maybe that's going to increase the price a little bit on Forever Young, but we'll see if he's able to finally get that Kentucky Derby victory for the country of Japan. Number 12 is Track Phantom, Craig, and kind of like with Dornoch coming into the season, he looked like he could be one of the main players on the road to the Kentucky Derby, and now he's coming in off a couple of disappointing losses in the Risen Star and the Louisiana Derby. He was short prices in both of those races, and I thought got pretty good trips on each occasion and just wasn't able to finish it off. Now Steve Asmussen is adding blinkers. We'll see if that's going to make a difference, but don't love equipment changes like that in a race such as the Kentucky Derby.
No, I don't really get it, the blinker change, but, you know, the guy's won more races than anybody in the history of North American racing, so I'm sure there's a reason for it. He's clearly very fast. We've talked about how he gets out of the gate on our shows before. I expect him to be up there, probably setting the lead. If I had to pick who I thought the leader would be, it would likely be him, but I don't think he's going to be around that last furlong.
The number 13 is West Saratoga, and I could see him being one of the feel-good stories for us of this race, Craig, because just an $11,000 yearling going out for Larry Demerit, who was certainly not a household name, and this scrappy horse kind of earned his way here through some minor placings in races like the Sam F. Davis and the Jeff Ruby Stakes, really just nosing out other horses to get those 3rd and 2nd place finishes to be able to earn the necessary points to get into the Kentucky Derby. He's an easy horse to root for, but a little tougher to make a case for him from a handicapping standpoint.
Yeah, he'd have to get a lot faster. We see his last race was on synthetic. He kind of runs up close to the pace when he runs his best races. I think that could get him in trouble in this spot.
The number 14 is Endlessly. He was the winner of that Jeff Ruby Stakes, and a very impressive winner at that, by 4 lengths, a decisive margin. He's won both of his starts on synthetic. He's won 3 of his 4 starts on the turf as a 2-year-old. He's never tried the dirt, though, and I think that has to be a big concern, Greg, because he's got more of a turf-oriented pedigree, especially on the dam side. And even his trainer, Michael McCarthy, sounds a little skeptical of this runner's ability to transition to the dirt.
I was going to say maybe I'm reading too much into it, but it didn't seem like the trainer's all that excited to be in here. Seemed like more of an owner decision. Maybe I'm off base there, but I'm not interested if the trainer's not excited to be in a race like this.
The number 15 is Domestic Product. We'll take a look at his victory in the Tampa Bay Derby back on March 9th. This horse did not get any pace to run into in this race. They basically ran the opening fractions of this race like it was a turf event and then sprinted home in that same fashion. And you could see it's a blanket finish coming onto the wire. And give this horse credit for finding that extra oomph to get past some of these horses in that blanket 4-horse finish. So, I mean, he's definitely learned some lessons since early in his career when he was more of a front-running type, or a forward type when he broke his maiden. And since then, he's rated effectively behind horses and finished well in slow-paced races like the Holy Bull and the Tampa Bay Derby. The fact of the matter is, though, Craig, he's one of the slowest horses coming in here on speed figures. And while I think you could fairly say maybe those last couple of performances could be upgraded a little bit due to the slow paces, he still has a lot to find to get on even terms with some of the main players.
Yeah, outside of TO Password, this horse might be the biggest unknown in the field because, like you said, those last 2, we just have no idea with the pace, just what he could have run. The one time we got an indication was the Remsen, but that was over a muddy track. So who knows, maybe he didn't like the mud because he didn't really show up that day. But I would have a tough time taking a horse who has barely run a triple-digit TimeformUS speed figure to this point.
You don't often get 20-1 plus on connections like Chad Brown and Irad Ortiz, but that might be the case in this Kentucky Derby with Domestic Product. The number 16 is Grand Mo the First, and he's another big price in this race, Craig, that is a little tough to build a case for. He was a close third behind Domestic Product in that Tampa Bay Derby, was just slightly more forward in the early stages, though covering a bit more ground racing wide, and then last time was no match for Fierceness in the Florida Derby. Couldn't even get by that lightly raced Catalytic in the late stages, just barely holding on for third that day. He's going to have to do a little better to be effective in this race.
Yeah, another even that one or that speed figure last time, I think, is you have to wonder about it was chasing that runaway winner, similar to what I said about Catalytic. Not always easy to reproduce that.
Up next is that morning line favorite, the number 17, Fierceness. And the major question in this race, Craig, centers around this horse. Do you trust Fierceness? Because I think there is no question, based on prior form, that he is the most talented horse coming into this race. Based on natural ability, he is just a cut above the rest in here. And we're seeing why in this Florida Derby triumph, where he is just under a hand ride, drawing off by over 13 lengths, 124 TimeformUS speed figure. And it's not like that came out of nowhere, Craig, because he had earned a 120 in the Breeders' Cup Juvenile as a 2-year-old. The problem with Fierceness is the 2 races where he's had some minor trouble coming out of the start. Maybe minor's unfair. He had real trouble in the Holy Bull, bounced around and then breaking a little bit slowly, lunging at the start of the Champagne. In both of those races, he threw in the towel pretty early and had nothing left for the stretch drive. The Kentucky Derby is a race that often features a chaotic start. Are you concerned that maybe Fierceness is a horse that could lose it at the starting gate? And what kind of trip do you think he's going to work out?
I'm actually very concerned. I mean, I don't think there's any doubt he's the best horse. And if he gets a clear trip on the outside, yeah, maybe he wins, but I don't want a short price on that personally. And what really struck me is when I really sat down to look at this race and looking at the PPs that we're seeing on the screen now is his wins have basically been just perfect trips. And you have to wonder what was the competition he beat in the Florida Derby. The 2-3 finishers were way back. They're only in this race because of that. There's no red fractions at all in his PPs. We don't know how he's going to handle that. So I have real concerns. Fierceness, he's probably the most likely winner, but I could see a case where he's way up the track as well. And at a short price, I'm just going to go elsewhere.
The number 18 is Stronghold. We'll take a look at his race that qualified him for the Kentucky Derby. That's the Santa Anita Derby back in early April. And credit to him for even qualifying out of Southern California, Craig, because there was a time earlier in the season when that looked like an impossible task given the strength in Bob Baffert's stable. And obviously, Bob Baffert runners not eligible for the Kentucky Derby again this year. But Stronghold was able to win a Santa Anita Derby that featured some defections. The horses like Nisos and Maymoon that were expected to be it here didn't ultimately progress on to the race and were not entered. Stronghold, he beat a decent horse in Imagination from the Bob Baffert stable, but he's more of one of the B or C tier 3-year-olds for that Baffert Bard. And Stronghold, he did improve his speed figure once again. And I think you have to respect this horse's consistency. It's just a matter of how he really stacks up against some others from a class standpoint.
Yeah, he's never really run a bad race. I don't think the 18 post does him any favors. He's a horse who likes to be up close. I could envision a scenario easily where he's 4 or 5 around the first turn, pressing a fast pace, or maybe in his case, chasing a fast pace. So he would have to improve quite a bit off that speed figure we saw in the Santa Anita Derby.
The number 19 is Wood Memorial winner Resilience, and he is one of those horses that was coming out of the Risen Star, that key prep race. He was 4th in that race and actually would have been dropping in class a little bit as he came into this Wood Memorial against a field that wasn't quite as accomplished as that group on the Risen Star. But I think what you have to like, Craig, is this horse did seem to take a step forward from a mental maturity standpoint. He rated in behind horses with the blinkers applied for the first time, traveled very well into the race, and puts it away fairly convincingly in the stretch, but I'm not sure that there was the most in terms of quality behind him that day, and he's going to have to get a little faster.
Yeah, he has been improving, so that's a good sign. He got a great trip, which he made kind of on his own. If anything, I think he showed the quality of the Louisiana path to the Kentucky Derby, as he really wasn't overly competitive in that Risen Star. But as you said, it was kind of a class drop into here. I think the 19 post is a real concern for him here. Had he drawn inside, I'd probably like him a bit more, but it's going to be tough to work out a trip.
And the number 20 is Society Man. He was actually second in that replay we just took a look at, the Wood Memorial, second at 106 to 1. He was a big price that day and certainly outran his odds to qualify for this Kentucky Derby with that runner-up result. He had just broken his maiden in the 4th start of his career, and the fact that he ran so well in the Wood Memorial or achieved that result, Craig, it does make you question the overall quality of that race a little bit. And too bad for Danny Garkin. I mean, he's got 2 runners in this race, and unfortunately, they bookend the field from a post position standpoint.
Yeah, he did not do well at the Kentucky Derby draw, that's for sure. I mean, this is a horse who seems to be moving in the right direction. Seems like a little bit too much, too fast to me, and the post certainly did him 0 favors.
Quickly, Craig, the 2 also eligibles we should mention, since it was just a couple of years ago that Rich Strike drove off the also eligible list to win the Kentucky Derby when most didn't even consider him. Epic Ride and Magatu, both coming out of the Bluegrass, the big prices in this race. Epic Ride does have some speed figure credentials.
Yeah, he does. And I don't think he had the easiest trip in the Bluegrass last time. He was chasing that very fast pace while wide. And he hung on to be a well-beaten, but still what I think is a pretty solid 3rd. I could see using him in vertical plays if he were to draw into the field, which we're recording this pretty early, but usually at least we get a defection or 2. So I won't be surprised if he's in the field.
Let's throw up our picks for this Kentucky Derby, Craig. And we've got some similar horses in the mix. I think we both respect that Louisiana route to the Kentucky Derby. You've got both Catching Freedom and Honor Marie in there. Sierra Leone is the favorite that we both included in our picks, but you did put Catching Freedom on top.
I did. It's a race where I actually I trust the pace projector. I expect this race to really be falling apart late, so I went with closers. I think Catching Freedom will probably work out a little better trip early than Sierra Leone will and not be mired on the inside. So looking for a race to fall apart. And if I had a 5th horse, it would have been your horse, Forever Young, who I also think is going to be coming late. I just think this is a race that's ripe for the closers.
Yeah, I was very interested in Honor Marie up until making my picks. I just wonder if he's going to be a shorter price than I really want him to be, given how popular of a pick he's become based on some of those recent workouts. And Forever Young, we'll see what kind of price he ultimately goes off at. I'm thinking there could be a little bit of fatigue with some of these UAE Derby horses after disappointing in so many years. And I just think this horse has better attributes than horses like Mendelssohn or Dermasotogake that have taken this route in the past, because he can overcome an off the pace trip. And I do think this horse possesses a real quality. So we'll see how he stacks up against some of the American trained 3-year-olds. I did put the number 11 Forever Young on top. Craig's pick is the number 4 Catching Freedom in the Kentucky Derby on Saturday at Churchill Downs. Good luck if you're playing the races this weekend.